presentation you are about to witness, Why Am I So Angry? What's Wrong with Me? Post-traumatic stress through the eyes of a Vietnam War door gunner, is the story of U.S. Army combat veteran Jim Chancellor, who served in Vietnam from 1969 to 1970. Residing in Lowell, Indiana with his wife Regina, Jim's blended family consists of 5 children, 8 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. Jim has been advocating for veterans and our families for over 40 years, and his outreach goes far beyond presentations like this. He lives boots on the ground, 24/7, 365, and he leaves no stone unturned finding veterans who need help. A gentleman of dedication and humor with a likable, low-key mixture of sincerity and intensity, Jim's mission is to let his hard-earned lesson of the past direct him to healing and healthy choices in the future. Author of the novel Till Death Do Us Part, Jim is the recipient of a Purple Heart, a Heroism Medal for Valor, and is an Indiana Military Veterans Hall of Fame inductee. Jim has worked with the Congressional Medal of Honor recipients Sammy Lee Davis of Freedom, Indiana, and Gary George Wetzel of South Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Jim has made special presentations to entertainers Toby Keith and Bob Hope, who made 57 tours for the United Service Organizations entertaining military personnel around the world, and who by an act of Congress in 1997 was made an honorary member of the U.S. Armed Forces. Jim presented hope with a special Vietnam memorial ring at Maryville, Indiana's Holiday Plaza in 1985, after which Hope said, "I really appreciate the Vietnam Veterans ring you presented to me on Sunday at the Holiday Plaza. You know that Vietnam was such a controversial war while it was going on, that our veterans never got any of the credit they deserved until after some of those pictures came out. Then the people saw what the real fighting was all about. They started to realize that these Vietnam veterans really put themselves on the line. I'll be very proud of this ring. I've had a lot of souvenirs in my lifetime, but this one is a standout." And now, folks, it's time for Jim's presentation. It is our sincerest hope that Jim's story will help us come together to heal. There will be a solution-based question and answer session to follow the presentation with our esteemed panelists, answering questions from both in-person and online participants. So for those who are joining us virtually, you are most encouraged to submit your questions and comments in the webinar chat box. While photography will be allowed, kindly now silence your phones during the remainder of our time together here. This presentation includes content folks may find disturbing, to include post-traumatic stress, graphic violence, and suicide. If anybody needs to leave the auditorium, there is a safe, quiet space in the lobby to the side where a veteran advocate will assist you. Please let any of us know if you need to leave, and someone will safely escort you to a quiet area where you will not be alone. Because remember, we are never alone, even in our darkest hour. And now, honored guests, please help me in welcoming Mr. Jim Chancellor.
Mayday, mayday, Gator 2-8 receiving heavy small arms fire. Chancellor, you keep your ass in the ship, do you hear me? This place is hot. We don't have any guns in the area. We're gonna get in there and get as many out as we can, and we're gonna get the hell out of here. Chancellor, do you hear me? Death! Mayday, mayday. Our crew chief has left the ship to assist you. Mayday.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight and allowing me to share some time with you about a very important issue, post-traumatic stress. I've been to war. I served with the 119th Assault Helicopter Company in Vietnam in 1969 and 70. On April 21st of 1970, our ship was shot down at a place called Dak Siang. For what happened that day in Dak Siang, I was awarded a Purple Heart and a Heroism Medal for Valor. I'll never forget that day in Vietnam. I cried with a man as he rocked his fellow soldier back and forth in his arms, telling him to hold on, hang on. We're on the bird now. We're going to live. We're going to be okay, when we both knew that death was near. I laughed with a man who just weeks earlier showed me pictures of his kid sister and read me letters from home. And then there was the constant fears of my safe return home. Those emotions have been with me my entire adult life, and they can be brought back to vivid reality with the slightest of sounds or smells, just like I'm sure they can for you and possibly for you and for all of the combat veterans. Now, before I begin, for those of you that know me, you know I believe that we are all the same. Doesn't matter where or when you serve this great country. We're all cut from the same cloth, sewn together with the same thread. This is not my beliefs. This was written about back in World War I by Lieutenant John McCrae when he wrote a poem called Flanders Field, and this in part is how it goes. To you with failing hands I throw the torch, be it yours to hold high. If ye break faith with those that die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field. Let me take a minute and tell you about that torch. That torch has indeed been passed from generation to generation, from Shiloh to Gettysburg. From Gettysburg, that torch was passed to Flanders Field, where the poppies grow. From Flanders Fields, it went to the beaches of Normandy. And from the beaches of Normandy, it went to Ishan, Korea. And again, we passed that torch. And with that torch went the fire and the zest and the love of country that has kept us free. From Ishan, Korea to the jungles of Vietnam, onto the mountains of Afghanistan and the deserts of Kuwait and Iraq. That torch was again passed, and the veteran again stood up and stayed strong. Because you see, we must stay strong because we are the protectors and the guardians of this great place we call home. That before I begin, let me tell you a little bit about me. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not even in the mental health field. I'm not here to discuss why our veterans do what they do or say what they say. Now that I've told you what I'm not, let me tell you what I am. I'm a man that's been married 4 times. I'm a man who's been in drug alcohol counseling twice. And I'm a man who a very long time ago was a door gunner on a helicopter in Vietnam. And I'm also a man that has been alone with his thoughts many, many times. This in part is my journey. This in part is my story. Thank you for allowing me to share it with you. Shall we begin? I show you these slides not to glorify war, but combat is the most exciting thing I've ever done in my entire life. Whether it's in the middle of a firefight or putting in troops in a hot LZ, your heart is pumping into your chest. Life and death, split-second decisions are made simply to survive. War and all of its consequences can rage like a wildfire out of control through the veterans and their families, and even from generation to generation. Post-traumatic stress. PTSD is an anxiety disorder that a person may develop after experiencing or witnessing an extreme, overwhelming traumatic event during which they felt intense fear, helplessness, or horror. A traumatic event is one that is intensely stressful, during which a person suffers serious harm or death, or witnesses an event during which another person or persons is killed, seriously injured, or threatened. Now, what I want you to remember about this is Webster's definition of PTSD. But the only thing I really want you to remember in this PTSD is an anxiety disorder. It's something that happened to you. It's not something that's wrong with you. It's something that happened to you. It's an anxiety disorder. Here are some examples of what could trigger PTSD. A serious threat to your life, seeing another person who has been recently or is being seriously injured or killed, harmful or fatal accidents, natural disasters, floods, tornadoes, etc., terrorism, assault, domestic violence or battery, rape, and finally war, combat, and life and death decisions.
There was a plane or whatever hit the building, then a secondary explosion.
There was like 3 explosions after that.
I used this clip for terrorism, but I also want to take this time and talk to you about first responders and police officers and people that run towards the trouble, towards whatever it is that's wrong. They go to defend every time. Oscar Martinez, our Lake County Sheriff, asked me to present to his police force. He said, Jim, I can't give you everyone at a time. I'll give you about 30 every Friday morning, and you present to them. So I did that. And the more I looked into being a police officer, the more I realized what a difficult job it was. For example, if you're on patrol with someone and there's a confrontation where there might be some physical fighting or something, when you go home that night, on one side of that door, you're a badass cop. You open that door and step through, it's like, Dad, can you help me with my homework? Mom, can you take me to soccer practice? So just in that few seconds, you have time to detox, just a matter of seconds. So, you know, police officers, first responders, hats off. You guys do a great job. I brought this slide back up to go through individually and talk about each one of these. A threat to your life is the first one. It's been said that the life expectancy of a door gunner in a firefight when they're down into a hellhole is 19 seconds. I'm not sure if it's 19 seconds or not, but it surely has been a threat to my life. Seeing another person who has been recently killed or seriously injured. I talked to you about rocking my friend, or seeing a friend rock his friend back and forth, begging him to hold on. So seeing another person, we did body bags, we did medevacs. Again, when it comes to war, those are pretty much given. Harmful or fatal accidents, you've seen the car crashes. That's very simple to explain. You can probably understand a car crash more than anything. Natural disasters, thank God I've never been involved in a natural disaster. I don't know what it's like to live through a tornado or a hurricane or a tsunami or anything like that. Terrorism. I talked about the slide about the Twin Towers. It's a day that I'll never ever forget. But if that's not terrorism, I don't know what is. Now, assault, domestic violence, or battery. I apologize to anyone in this room that's been physically overtaken, who's been physically beaten or brutally beaten, raped, or suffered been overpowered physically. I apologize for that. Rape, war, combat, life and death decisions. I'm going to talk about a life and death decision right now with a friend of mine named Jerry Clapp. Jerry Clapp and I served together with the 119th, and we were on a mission together when Jerry's ship was called upon to make a medevac. And the problem with this medevac was that it was in what we call a hellhole, where the trees are so tall that the helicopter can't get down to the ground level. So the grunts on the ground would take and cut the trees down just enough where the helicopter could come down through the trees without hitting its rotor blades or its tail rotors, make the evacuation, and then go back up. Well, they got down just fine. You know, Jerry went down, and they got the medevac on the ship. as they started back up, they started receiving fire. So because the mountains on the sides were higher than the helicopter, Jerry could not return fire because he would have shot his rotor blades off. They were just sitting ducks. Jerry then tried to call Lively and make sure Lively was okay. He's the door gunner on the other side. When Jerry got to the other side, he saw that Lively had taken a round in the upper chest area and came back out his lower back area. Now, the only training we had, the only medical training that we received were compresses. So Jerry put a compress on his shoulder where the entrance wound and one on the back. And he held it, tried to save his life, stopped the bleeding. About halfway up when they were getting out of the hellhole, the pilot said to Jerry, "Jerry, receiving fire from 9 o'clock. Receiving fire from 9 o'clock. So Jerry could return fire. Jerry could protect the ship now because the gunfire was coming from below the rotor blades. At that very instant, at that very second, he had to make a decision. Did he leave Lively and go protect the ship and the people that he serves with? Or does he stay with Lively and try to save his life? Jerry died when he was around 45, and he was from Paducah, Kentucky, and his family asked me to come down and speak at his funeral. And I did, and I talked about Jerry just as I knew him, as an honorable man and you know, who loved his country. And I didn't know how he died. No one knew how he died, but I knew when he died. He died that day he left Lively to protect the ship, and Lively died. War in split-second decisions. Three types of PTSD: acute, chronic, and delayed. As you can see, acute is very intense. It diminishes within 6 months. Chronic is the same way, early onset, but prolongs longer than 6 months. So acute is intense in 6 months, prolonged is a little bit longer. Now we get to the devil himself, and that's called delayed. Delayed post-traumatic stress. One Saturday morning, my brother called me, and Bill never served in the military at all, but he's as big a patriot that's in this room. And he said, "Jim, have you seen the movie Saving Private Ryan?" And I said, No, I haven't, Bill. And he said, "Jim, I know what you do. I know that you work with people that suffer from PTSD. You know, why don't you go see that movie?" And I said, "Okay, I will." But I didn't. And then he sent me a special edition DVD of that movie. And he said, "Here, watch this." So one morning I put it on and watched the first 30 minutes or so. And I said to myself, "Boy, God, I hope this is Hollywood. I hope to God this wasn't the way it was." So I turned it off, and I went to the VFW, and I tried to find somebody that was on one of those beaches, and I found him. And he said, "No, that's exactly what happened." He said the gates went down, and the first 4 or 5-year-olds were killed instantly. People were jumping off the sides, holding their pack above their head, in water over their head, trying to get to the beach. He said some people were actually holding their friends as shields to get to the beach. And there was a huge spike in PTSD claims from World War II veterans after that. If you remember what we said, sights and sounds can just rip it off, no matter how long ago it was. Symptoms of PTSD. I put these two, depression and isolation, at the top of the list, along with emotional numbness. We're going to talk nearly the entire time from here out on depression and isolation and how those two can spiral down and cause you many of the problems that we're going to discuss. When I got home from Vietnam in December of 1970, this was my welcome home. "Welcome home, Jim." That was it. I was home and I didn't want anything else. I went into the house and I had dinner with my family. My grandmother was there. A lot of kisses, a lot of hugs. And a lot of, you know, we're glad you're home, Jim. But then I took that uniform off and I put on some jeans and I went down to the Colonial Club where we used to hang out, where we still hung out. And I walked in the little bar and all of a sudden one guy jumped up and said, "Hey, Jim's here." He's going to play shortstop for us. He's going to bowl on our team on Friday night. And I said, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Let me tell you where I've been. Let me tell you what I've done. Wait a minute. It's like, Chancellor, let it go. Let it go. And so after a couple of beers, the guy sat down next to me, and no one would understand, because the only person that could understand is a veteran like myself. And the guy put his hand on my back and he goes, Chancellor, it's over, man. It's over. Just let it go. I couldn't let it go then, and I really couldn't let it go now. So they were into yesterday like it's going to be the same tomorrow, and I was in a different mood. I was in war.
First thing I did when that plane finally landed was kiss the ground. Next thing I did was to go find my friends down at the old hangout. We drank some beer and talked a lot about old times. But when the booze finally hit Billy Joe Grimes, he said, I don't know what it is, but you seem different to me. I said, I just came back from a place where they hated me and everything I stand for. A land where our brothers are dying for others who don't even care anymore. If I'm not exactly the same good old boy that you ran around with before, I just came back from a war. The very next morning, I took a walk through the neighborhood. I thought it's been so long since I've been in a place where everything is good. People laughing and children were playing, and as I watched them I found myself praying, Lord, keep them safe here at home in the land of the free. Just came back from a place where they hated me and everything I stand for. A land where our brothers are dying for others who don't even care anymore. If I'm not the same little freckle-faced boy that grew up in that house next door, I just came back from a war. Cherish this sweet way of life, and I hope you know that it comes with a price. I just came back from a place where they hated me and everything I stand for. A land where our brothers are dying for others who don't even care anymore. Chances are I never will be the same. I really don't know anymore. I just came back from a war. I
Symptoms of PTSD, isolation and depression we've talked about. Let's talk a minute about survivor's guilt. Survivor's guilt is when I need to have a reason why I lived. I need to understand why I didn't die. If I would have done something different, if I would have given a different command, if we'd have fought a different way, why is it that I survived and he didn't? I went to the wall with my friend John Stacks, and after pencil sketching 11 people that we flew with that died, I sat at the end of the wall on a bench, and John came up and said, "Are you okay, Jim?" And I said, "I think so, John. I don't want to be hurt any more than what I'm hurt. I don't want to be on that wall, but I can't figure out why I'm alive." And he said, "Well, Jim, we don't know that. I don't know why I'm alive. We don't know why you're alive." Survivor's guilt. It stays with you and it haunts you, and you'll see it in a video coming up. Anxiety reactions. I'm just going to talk about me with anxiety reactions. If I'm at the mall with my wife and we're walking and people are walking towards us, the first thing I do is I look and see if I can see a gun. I look and see if there's a gun I can see. Then I look and see where his right hand is. Where's his right hand? Is it in his pocket or is it out? Then I always listen for the steps as it goes past me, making sure that they kept walking. Another thing I do, I live in an old farmhouse, 125-year-old farmhouse, and every time it snows, I look out of every window and see if I see tracks in the snow. Has anybody been walking around my house? And Regina, my wife, is 10 years younger than I am, and she doesn't quite understand the bulldog in me. Once we were at the mall, or I think we were at Walmart, and she got a couple of aisles away from me, and I called her on the phone. I said, "Honey, why did you ditch me like that?" She said, "Jim, I'm right here a couple aisles away. What's the big deal?" And I said, "Honey, if I can't see you, I can't protect you. I got to see you, and so I can protect you." She still doesn't get it. Intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, and night terrors. I don't have any flashbacks or night terrors, but let me tell you about intrusive thoughts. Intrusive thoughts are when you want things to be different. That thought comes into your mind of something that happened to you, but the ending was tragic, or the ending was terrible, and you want the ending to be different. But that thought comes into your mind all the time, hoping it'll be different at the end, but it never is. We were transporting civilians in Vietnam, and it was on the side of a hill, not a big hill, but just a slight hill. And the helicopter, in order to stay as level as possible, we had to put the skids right on, just the front skids on the ground, and the back was off the ground. And there was not supposed to be any VC in the area. And so we were just moving maybe 6, 7 at a time from one place to the other. And then about the third or fourth trip, we started receiving fire from my side of the ship. So, I just want to tell you that everyone knew that if you didn't get on that helicopter that time, that you were dead. That the VC knew that you were American sympathizers, and they would kill you immediately, without question. So people are trying to jump on the ship. I'm trying to work out with my 60, try to protect the ship. So we try to take off, people jumping on the ship on my side, and Steve, the aircraft commander, said, "Jim, we're too heavy. We can't get up, Jim, we're too heavy." And the helicopter was rocking back and forth like this. So I threw some more people off, I grabbed them and threw them off, and I kept working out with my 60 trying to protect the ship. As another man tried to jump on the ship, I kicked him. I kicked him right in the collarbone. As he hit the ground, in an attempt to save his life, he ran under my 60, and the ship is going up and down, and he ran right into the tail rotor of the ship. Killed him instantly. Intrusive thoughts. I often think that if I would have let him on, maybe he would have lived. If I'd have just, maybe his family was on that ship, and he was just trying to get on. I don't know. But intrusive thoughts are thoughts that you have over and over again that you wish would end differently, but they never do. Now we're going to talk about some symptoms of war. We talked about symptoms of PTSD. Now we're going to talk about war. Some of the symptoms of war are suicide, addiction, divorce, and homelessness. Now let's talk about suicide. Remember when I talked to you about, I put that slide up first. I said isolation and depression would cause you to spiral down. Now journey back with me with what we've talked about already. I go into the tavern where I grew up. Nobody wants to hear me. Nobody wants to hear my story. Let it go, Jim. So I back up a little bit, and I think, maybe nobody does care. And I start to isolate. And when you start to isolate, that's the worst thing that can happen, because that will turn into depression, addiction. I'll talk about addiction in a minute. Divorce and homelessness. Suicide is caused by many of these things. The isolation that we just talked about. When I was in Vietnam, I escaped reality through drugs and alcohol. That's how I got away from the war. Even if it was only for 2 or 3 hours, that's how I got away from the war. Now, I go into the tavern and they shut the door on me. Nobody understands. Everybody says, just get over it. So how do I escape that pain? The same way, through addiction, through alcohol, addiction. Now we're self-medicating and we're isolated, and the next step is depression. And the following that, without someone intervening, without somebody stepping in and helping that person, it's very possible that they can slide right down into depression, isolation, addiction, suicide. 22 a day. 22 people that were willing to give their life for our freedom die every day. 22 veterans that made the sacrifice so we can live, die at their own hands. Addiction. This is Webster telling you about 27% and 1 in 4 soldiers abuse prescription drugs. 31% of the veterans that experience combat are more likely to be binge drinking. Addiction was a way to escape. Divorce. 42% of veterans divorced during or after their tour. That's almost half of us. The first 90 days of deployment are the most when divorces take place for veterans. Common reasons for divorce amongst veterans are transitioning to civilian life, renegotiating roles between partners, changes during the deployment, and the influence of PTSD. So I come home and I want to get right back into the role that I played. I was a dad, and I drove them to school, but in reality, the spouse was the one that did all that. She was the one that made the lunches. She was the soccer coach. She was the one that helped with the homework. That transition to get that one spouse back into the other spouse to bring that marriage together often suffers. Homelessness. 50% is the rate in which veterans are more likely to become homeless when compared with other Americans. 75,000 veterans are homeless on any given night. 5.5% of the current homeless population are veterans who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan. Several years ago, I did a homeless project. I used a multi-purpose building in Calumet Township, and we went out and we sought the homeless. And we sent buses out to them. I rode in the back of a police car, and at nighttime, we went under the bridges to try to find them. A lot of times, they just want to be left alone. Now, if there's a veteran or any person out there homeless, and he wants to better their lives, there's many, many options to do that. But the longer he stays on the street, the more delusional he gets, the harder it's going to be to captivate him and bring him back home. I was told that there's a group of veterans that hung out at a McDonald's on Indianapolis Boulevard. So I went over there, and I was smart enough that I didn't just walk up and say, hey, my name is Jim. Let's talk about you being homeless. No, what I did was I left a flyer on the table next to them, and I just left. And then at noon, I volunteered at John Bosco Church to work in the soup kitchen. So the veterans at McDonald's, they got a free coffee and maybe a roll. And then at lunchtime, they were in this soup line, and they got a hot meal again. Then later that night, I spoke at a church, and lo and behold, here they were again. The same group, maybe even a bit larger. And what they did was they took an orange or a banana, and they stuck it in their pouch or in their backpack, and they were gone into the night. Homelessness is terrible. It's something that we need to work on every day, along with suicide and depression and isolation. Homelessness can be eliminated if we all work together. When I showed this slide, my wife Regina looked at me and she said, Jim, she goes, I think that slide's all about you. You know, all of that stuff is you. Poor memory and aggravation and anger and difficulty concentrating, that's all you. Well, it's all us. It's all of us together. We all have these little subtle quips, I'll call them, that set us apart from the general population. Battle fatigue, shell shock, PTSD, TBIs, and moral injuries. You know, all of you here have some type of history, whether it be with the military or just in general. And so you'll know in military history, battle fatigue and shell shock are the same as PTSD or TBI, not so much TBIs, but those were the names of a mental stress from World War I and World War II. And then you have PTSD. PTSD is fear-based. This is what I want you to understand, that PTSD is fear-based, and moral injuries up there are injuries to the soul. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute. TBIs naturally is a traumatic brain injury, and then moral injuries. I'm going to give you two examples of moral injuries, one that I suffered and one that a young Marine suffered. We'll start with the Marine. We were doing a presentation, and he got up and walked out, the Marine did. And after it was over, I went and I sought him out, and I found him, and he told me this story. He said, we went into a tea at a small place somewhere around Fallujah. He said, didn't know what it was. It wasn't Fallujah, but it was close to it. He said, we pulled into the tea and we started receiving fire from the storefronts and from the rooftops. He said it was a fierce fight for 35 or 40 minutes until the helicopters got there. Once the helicopter gets there, it usually puts out the firefight. So after it was over, they went and they tried to see what they did. After it was over, they went to do recon on the people that were in the buildings that were firing on them. And they found women and children. They found women and children that the cowards held up as shields, hoping that we would not fire back if we saw that woman or that child. And so I told him, I said, you know, you didn't know. This is war, you didn't know. He said, I didn't know that time. He goes, but what about the next time? What about the next time I go in and I got to fire back and I got to defend the Humvee that I'm in? Just for that split second, it's going to flash back to me that there might be a child in there. There might be a woman in there that he's holding up as a shield. So what do you do? Remember what we talked about. War. Ugly as hell. Dark. Exciting. War. Split second life and death decisions. Does he return fire immediately and protect the Humvee that he's in? Or does he worry about somebody that might be in there dying? I haven't talked to him in a long time. I hope he's fine. You know, there was a time in Vietnam that I was in a free fire zone. A free fire zone is where if you receive fire, you can return fire. You don't have to call in for grid coordinates. You don't have to call in to see if there's any friendlies in the area. There's not supposed to be any bad guys in this area. A free fire zone. So we were going along the treetops going to a mission, and all of a sudden I received fire. I started to receive fire from a village down below us. So Steve Warren, who was flying the ship, he banked, and I started working out with my 60, returning fire. And as I did, I realized that I could set the hooches on fire with my tracers. So I could set the whole village on fire with the tracers from my machine gun, and that's exactly what I did. and I delivered as much carnage as I possibly could. When I got back to the hooch that night, I walked in there just as proud as can be. I got my M60 on my shoulder. I said, hey, let me tell you what I did today. I took it to the bad guys, and I told that story. And there was an old salty dog named Cheney that said, sit down, Chancellor, sit down. Let me tell you what you really did. So he told me about the Vietnamese tactics, the Viet Cong, how they did things. He said, there'd be a village of, what, 10, 12 hoochers that you destroyed? There'll be 5 or 6 people walk in. The VC, 5 or 6 people will come in there. They have weapons. No one else in the village has weapons. They can rape, they can do whatever they want, they can steal, they can take whatever they want because they're the only people that have weapons. Now, they'll wait for your helicopter. Once your helicopter comes by, they'll shoot a couple clicks at it, then they'll leave the village. Once they're gone, Chancellor, did you take it to the bad guys? No. You killed farmers and fathers and uncles and people that only wanted peace. After he told me that, I picked up my 60 and I put it on my shoulder, and as I walked away, I thought to myself, wars, how do you know? Who says who lives and who dies? Moral injuries to the soul. Once I was asked to speak at a tent revival, and you know, me being very naive, I had a suit on and I went to the tent revival, and lo and behold, it was in the woods and everybody had jeans and rode horses. But prior to that, I asked the pastor, what is the subject matter, Pastor? What do you want me to talk about? He said, I want you to connect God and war. I said, okay, and I hung up. Then I thought to myself, how in the world am I going to connect an all-loving and all-forgiving God with war, with the tragedies of war? And I couldn't do it. So instead of trying to figure that out, instead of trying to plug those two in, I just left them with a question. I spoke, and then I said, I'm going to ask you a question that I can't answer. I'm going to ask you to try to understand something that I can't understand. And that question is, do I need to ask for forgiveness for what I did in war? I know that I'd be forgiven. God will forgive me. All I have to do is ask. He's an all-loving, all-forgiving God. That's not the question. The question is, do I need to ask for forgiveness? Was I wrong to follow orders? Was I wrong to decimate that village? Was that Marine wrong to return fire? You know, I have a kindred spirit. I feel a kindred spirit with all combat veterans, because only you can feel as I do, because you've been there. And I also feel sometimes when I lay down to sleep, I feel your hands on my back as I lay my head on your shoulders. And I can hear you whisper to me, one day you'll know, Jim. One day you'll know, and it'll be all right.
We've seen a lot of stories about veterans and post-traumatic stress disorder, but tonight, for the first time, we're able to show you new therapies that are changing the lives of vets and their families. 2 million Americans have served in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Veterans Administration tells us that 1 out of 5 suffers from PTSD. One reason we're seeing so much of it is because many of our troops have been ordered on combat tours 3, 4, or even 5 times. The VA, overwhelmed by the need, decided to try new treatments that were originally designed for rape victims. Over 2 months, we were allowed to sit in and listen as our troubled veterans fought the war within.
How can you live the life where everyone's afraid of you? You know, you go to town and people says, that's the crazy vet, don't mess with him.
My wife told me, something's got to change or we got to leave.
When you try to talk to somebody that hasn't been there, hasn't experienced it, they don't understand. And so you just kind of get laughed at.
Yeah.
The 16 men around this table arrived via Afghanistan, Iraq, or both. Some are here from Vietnam.
I see that I do have, that opportunity to pick myself up. At 63 years old and start all over again.
They've started over again many times, but their path has led back to isolation, drugs, booze, and suicide attempts. Now, they're in the VA hospital in Little Rock, Arkansas, where they will live for 8 weeks to break through the emotions that have derailed their lives.
Depression, anxiety, anger, worthlessness, guilt.
Guilt?
Survivors, guilt. Why me? Why am I alive? Why are they not? That's one of the hardest thoughts to deal with,
Eric Collins was wounded in a rocket attack in Afghanistan. Over a year, 17 of his buddies died. How did you cope with these feelings of anger and depression and guilt when you first got out?
Alcohol, and lots of it. That's where it started off. And alcohol led to my depression worsening, which led to more substance abuse. Crack, cocaine is my drug of choice. So my whole life spiraled downward out of control.
To take control, Collins volunteered for one of the new therapies called prolonged exposure. It forces him to work at remembering every detail of what he's tried to forget.
Next thing I hear a loud boom. My ears start ringing. And I wake up, open my eyes, and I'm on the ground.
Dr. Kevin Reeder runs the program.
How are you feeling at this point? What were you feeling at that time?
Anger. I'm scared. Feeling pain. My leg, my back, my arm, my whole body.
Okay, let's go from the beginning. Gotta keep doing this.
Next thing I know, I hear a loud boom.
They call it prolonged exposure because Collins will relive the story of the attack 5 times a session. There's a tape running, and he'll listen to his memory throughout the day to break its power. Tell me about prolonged exposure therapy.
Sure. They've done everything they can to push these memories away. In the process, they haven't gained a full realization of the impact and the meaning that these stories have on their lives. I like to use the term, we're staring the dragon in the eye.
Where did these therapies come from?
A lot of these therapies came about with survivors of physical or sexual abuse, those types of traumas.
What are the similarities?
The symptoms. The symptoms, the avoidance, the isolation, the hypervigilance, the extreme anxiety, irritability, inability to sleep, nightmares. Same thing. Different sources, but same thing.
Can't move my legs, can't move my arms.
What does that do for you?
It helps me to get past the guilt, survivor's guilt. And that's a building block. Every time I get through it, I get stronger. And it helps every time.
It's okay to be alive.
Yeah.
And you weren't sure that was true before?
No, I didn't want to be alive. I wanted to be right there with them. The whole purpose of life was gone.
To lose one of your buddies in a firefight, you don't want to see that. You don't want to feel that again. And so, yeah, when you get back to the rear, you're pissed off because you don't want to get close to anybody anymore.
Anthony Appolito experienced those multiple tours we talked about. He fought for a year in Afghanistan, spent 1 month at home, then went to Iraq, and later Afghanistan again.
The more deployments you get, the more time you spend out there, it just keeps on stacking. I mean, the first one, it hurts, but you don't get really time to heal. And then another one happens, and then another one.
On his first tour, Appolito's patrol was ambushed. 2 buddies died, and 20 were wounded.
I had no weapon. No one had my back.
I
They write about days like that in the other key therapy here called cognitive processing.
After a trauma or multiple traumas, often a person can believe the world just is a dangerous place. And so what we do with CPT, cognitive processing therapy, is they write an impact statement at the beginning of therapy to show them the impact of the trauma on their lives and on their beliefs.
Yes, I have worked on it.
They read that statement about the trauma to the group, and then they discuss how their lives are still held in the grip of war.
I probably still need some work.
I never had a fear of life. I never had a fear of living. I never had a fear of going to the gas station and getting shot while I'm pumping gas because I needed gas in my car.
They plow through a workbook that challenges their guilt with statements like, I shot a woman in combat, therefore I'm worthless, or my friend was killed by the enemy, I'm responsible. Cognitive processing tries to put the war in the past and help them re-examine who they are today. It's tough. We noticed this on Apolito's workbook.
How many of you would go back to a deployed environment with your branch of service right now if that opportunity was available to you? A lot of hands up. Real quick, why are your hands going up so much?
You miss everything about how hard it was, how bitter you got, how angry and emotional, the things you saw, and you missed that camaraderie, that brotherhood, your buddy. Yes, that downtime, the struggling with things, man, it's everything, but you miss it, you mourn that. It's weird. It's that intimacy. I will never get that back. None of us will ever get that back. And that's
Gable Darbone never planned to be part of that brotherhood he mentioned. In 2001, he was out of high school headed to college, but then 9/11 pushed him to an Army recruiter instead.
My mom, I remember she was crying in the kitchen. She goes, Gable, you don't know what it's like for those boys coming back from Vietnam, how hard they had it, and what they came back with. I said, Mom, it's different, though. We got attacked. We got attacked. I said, I'm volunteering. I said, I'll take anything. I'm willing to give my life. That's how strongly I felt.
I joined to serve my country. I joined to protect my freedoms, my future kids' freedoms.
Darbone was one of the most thoughtful people we met. He served in Afghanistan and Iraq. One day, his unit was clearing a house. It exploded, and 2 buddies were burned.
You can get angry, get mad. We get very angry. And we took it out on certain people, and you enjoyed it at the time. You did.
You did things to Iraqis that you're not proud of.
Of course, but that was surviving emotionally, mentally. I was never a violent man. I became different, slowly. We all have that instinct, that survival instinct. And that survival instinct is very real.
At home, the survival instinct didn't let go. Darbone was like most other vets here. Certain triggers brought the instinct back. The smell of diesel returned him to his combat outpost. Crowds made him fearful.
I started isolating. I couldn't do anything. My dad had to come over and mow my lawn. Mom had to come over and pay my bills. I wouldn't leave my house for a day or two. I didn't want to make small talk. I didn't want somebody to ask me, hey, how you doing? I didn't like those words. I got very secluded, like a recluse.
For 9 years, Darbone told himself he was okay or would be okay. And then the folks at work urged him to get help. This was Darbone after 7 weeks of self-examination as they all prepared to go home.
And when I went in, I had a heart. And I volunteered. I don't blame nothing on anybody. I don't blame nothing on myself. I don't blame nothing on my leaders. In fact, I had good leaders. I blame nothing on the Army. I think it's just the way it is. And it sucks. I hate it. I hate it. I don't want to go home. People would always ask me when I came back, so what do I tell my boyfriend when he comes back, or how do I approach this to my son? I said, when he starts talking, just listen. Don't judge it. just listen.
There is probably a soldier or a Marine sitting alone watching this on television right now.
Thousands of them, I'd imagine.
And to them, you would say what?
I hope you can find the courage to get help, because all you're doing is killing yourself. And you don't have to live like that. There is good people in this world that are willing to help you, and it's been the hardest thing for me to do, but I wouldn't have changed coming here for the world.
In our 2 months here, 28 men sat around the table. 3 couldn't endure it and dropped out. The VA finds that nationwide, about 77% graduate from this with a drop in their PTSD symptoms. It's progress, but they also have a saying around here: there is no cure.
I don't think there's a cure for what we're talking about. We're talking about living and putting people more in touch with their lives and emotions and good days and bad days. This isn't cancer. We can't go get it. We have to teach people that they can live with this and live a valued life, a life they want.
After 8 weeks here, how you doing?
How am I doing? I don't know yet. That's an honest answer. But I know deep down inside, things will work themselves out.
I was asked one time during the interview, what is it that America can do for our veterans? And that answer was very easy for me. I said, just respect us. Just respect us for what we have given you. And the lady looked at me kind of puzzled, and she said, Mr. Chancellor, what is it that you've given us? And I said, that's simple. We've given you peace of mind. We've given you freedom to choose. We've given you part of our soul. And all we want in return is respect. Respect. That's all we ask for. Thank you all very much.
The Veterans Treatment Court is a minimum of 18 months. Most people take about 24 months to accomplish it. And there are 3 different phases of the Veterans Treatment Court. There's phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And in the first phase of Veterans Treatment Court, you do the mental health assessment at the VA. You come to court every 2 weeks. You get drug tested 3 times a week. You meet with a case manager once a week, and you meet with your mentor once a week. And we do that for the first 4 to 6 months till we make sure that the person is acclimated into the program. After they complete that portion of it, then in the second phase, they come to court once a month. They get drug tested 2 to 3 times a week, depending on how well they did in their drug testing in the first part. And then they see their case manager and their mentor still weekly. When we go to the third phase, they come to court every other month. They're drug testing 1 to 2 times a week, and they are seeing their mentor and their case manager weekly. It's a very labor-intensive program, but I always tell the veterans when they're coming into the program, if they buy into the program, if they drink the Kool-Aid, so to speak, the person who's standing in front of me at the beginning of the program will not be the same person that's standing in front of me at the end of the program. I call it happy court. Most of the time it is. There are sanctions and rewards throughout the program. We did have one meeting where 3 different veterans tested positive for cocaine, and I took them all into custody, and I'm pretty much sure I scared everyone else in the program to death that day. So, it's definitely not easy. It's not a gimme, but the good part about it is rewarding that veteran for their service to our country. By the end of the period, if they're successful, they get their case dismissed and expunged from their record like it never happened.
Well, I of course want to thank you very much and thank Jim Chancellor, who's been a partner and a champion for advocate for veterans and PTSD for a very long time. Ultimately, to answer your question specifically, currently I have a piece of legislation that we had just submitted that will be up for a vote that allows survivors, so children and spouses of individuals who sacrificed their lives in combat, would be eligible for the GI Bill. That is very important there were VSOs, organizations that asked me to carry a piece of legislation, and we did that. Ultimately, there is another piece of legislation that we passed and is law for survivors of sexual abuse that were reporting. It's the dignity of sexual assault in the DOD. And so there's a process in place for the VA that was signed into law for all survivors to go through a process with professionals. Also, we are working currently. This morning, I had an opportunity, or I'm sorry, Tuesday morning, I sat down with an organization which is 1441 out of Lowell. Jamie was a mother. Ultimately, what had happened is during the transition from the DOD to the back home into out of service life, an individual, a son, took his life, and he had a brother. They joined the buddy system, and the brother was still in. And it's a tragic story. And there's a family in Lowell that has one less family member because of something that happened in the service, and he wasn't able or didn't reach out for the help. So I bring that up because we oversee and make sure that the TAP program, the transition program that back into civilian life, has the funding necessary. We oversee that. We want to make sure that there's still a part of the mission so that people can transition into jobs at any time of entrepreneurship, but have the support system around them to be able to transition properly. So that's a very important part of it, and mental health and mental health access. So on the VA side, making sure that veterans don't have to wait 6-7 months to be treated. On the VA side, when it comes to mental health, is extremely important, and making sure that it is happening in a timely fashion. So those are things that we work on every single day.
So as someone with lived experience living with and supporting for a number of years a veteran husband who suffered chronic PTSD, look, I can honestly say I was a witness to the fragility of life due to his physical and mental war injuries. And through my connections with the families of the core client group, which are our military, our public safety officers, and first responders, I became aware that there are some really unmet needs for our support services. So with knowledge and understanding, and combined with the establishment in Australia of the Royal Commission, there's been, it's been a 3-year process of hearings and investigations to looking at the cause of defence and veteran suicide. And those recommendations within Australia will be coming out in September this year. At this point, I really do want to acknowledge the Commissioners, Nick Cardis, who chaired this process, Dr. Peggy Brown-Douglas, and the Honourable James Douglas, who have worked tirelessly to really raise and put forward some important recommendations that hopefully will have a huge impact on our veteran community. And I made the decision in response to this by setting up an online hub called Resolute Ready Virtual Hub. It's a local, national and global digital hub. It's like a platform, a directory, almost like a digital library, linking you to support services at a local, national and global level. Now, our mission is to stop the intergenerational cycle of service trauma, restore relationships and work towards global, stopping global suicide. Also to empower people through education, to advance social and public welfare, and to improve and support global mental health and educational initiatives. Now, within families, as we know, service trauma impacts families, not just the veteran. I believe the whole family wears the uniform. So, we've got the impact of mental health. Exactly, thank you, Jim, for your wonderful presentation. You cover PTSD, depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions that are really prevalent among our veterans and first responders due to them being exposed to traumatic events and high, stress environments. Then, substance abuse, we know the impact that can have on the individual. The physical injuries, both physical and invisible, and also, such as, during services, such as at the amputations and traumatic brain injuries and chronic pain that really have long-lasting effects on individuals and the impact of that on families. And also, I really want to, through my lived experience, I kind of break it down to 3 sections, and that is these wonderful human beings who risk their lives daily to protect our borders and to keep us safe and to give us this amazing life of choice that we have today. I must, all the way from Australia and every serving member across the globe, thank you so much for your service. Where the downfall for me is in the transition to civilian life. The transitioning from military or the first responder roles to civilian life can be really challenging. And as individuals, we know that, we can struggle to find employment, housing, a sense of purpose outside of their previous roles. Understanding that these wonderful serving members, when they're in the military, they have identity, a sense of belonging, mateship. And then when they transition, they can quite easily lose that sense of identity and belonging. I think it's really important that we put programs such as yours, Julie Cantrell. Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful program with us, and I look forward to connecting you with some people that are working in that space here in Australia. Now, family dynamics, as we know, families of veterans and first responders, they really face unique challenges, including relationship strain, domestic violence, the parenting difficulties that are associated with the stressors and the trauma experienced by their loved ones. There's also, the appropriate access that we need, to healthcare, accessing quality healthcare services, including mental health treatment and specialised care for service-related injuries that can be really difficult for our veterans and first responders, due just to the long waste of lists, wait times in actually accessing these professionals, and the lack of resources in some areas, but also breaking down the stigma around mental health. The more we talk about it, the more we raise awareness. Suicide is not a bad word. Don't be afraid to connect and ask, are you okay, with your mate? Raising the awareness. And what we want to try and avoid is the social isolation that does occur, and those feelings of alienation, which are really common amongst our veterans and first responders, particularly if they're finding it really difficult to relate to civilians, and the whole stigma that's associated with mental health even within the workplace. And then we've got the suicide risk, veterans and first responders that have high rates of suicide compared to general population, and often, as a result, are untreated. The commission, the Royal Commission that's just come out from in the last 3 years, I think they've had, in the past, we've had 800 recommendations that have come out of, in the last 20, 30 years, with suicide rates proving that it has not improved. Between 1997 and 2020, there are about 1,700 suicides, but we predict that there's probably more, closer to 3,000. But we break that up with there are 2 main problems. One is the area within the Defence Force, the problems that exist in that structure, but then there's also the problems that are associated with transition claims and entitlements. And I just want to stress that these issues are not just based in your local area. These are global issues. So with the wonderful virtual hub, if we can just bring down these digital borders and really focus on engagement, collaboration, and share knowledge. And really send that message that you are truly not alone. There is support out there for you. Regarding the virtual hub, I'd really love to encourage whoever's listening to this webinar that if you are a mental health provider, or you are an academic and you'd like to share your resources, or you're actually a business that's willing to employ a veteran or a first responder to assist with the transition, you can actually go to resoluteready.com and submit your service, and that will be carefully vetted. And then you can become part of this amazing solution in recovery. We need to be able to use connection as a source of intervention. The earlier we can get to you to support our serving members, I believe that at the end of the day, what we really desire and wish for you is that you live a well-lived life. And we cannot thank you enough for your service. And also to Jim Chancellor, to Connie, thank you so much for being our Resolute Ready community engagement liaison, because this has had a ripple effect. You might want to add a bit more to that, Connie.
Yes.
Your involvement.
And thank you for all of your comments. God bless you for all you're doing. We're going to continue boots to ground with all of this. But I can say that thank you because of your involvement with me. I'm becoming more involved also. I have my own service trauma. I'm becoming more involved locally with.
I think it's just really important that if you see any unusual behavior, withdrawal, or that someone is self-medicating or is not participating or wanting to participate as part of the family, sometimes the best thing that, like, the first aider sometimes is the spouse, the neighbor, the friend, and if you can guide them to support. So sometimes I'd go, have you seen a GP? That we call that our general practitioner, like, your doctor. Have you thought about, just asking them questions like, how are you feeling? Are you okay? If you sense that they're actually showing signs of suicide, don't be afraid to say, are you feeling suicidal? Do you have a plan? There's actually training that you can do in how to conduct. In Australia, we've got some wonderful programs that actually train, in particular, one of the organisations here, which is Open Arms, a 24-hour counselling service. And there's other organisations that support this type of training, educational training. And I can link you up to those organisations within Australia.